Morning, everybody. Just trying to get all situated here. Theoretically. Doot. Okay. Technology. So far, I'm keeping up. I think I'm on the edge, though. I'm starting to teeter into that space of, I don't know about that. I think my kids might know more than I do. But sometimes they don't know what they're doing with technology. So before we get started with anything official this morning, I have to tell you something that happened this week that maybe might make you laugh a little bit. So Connor, my oldest son, fancies himself a good joke. And he likes to make people laugh, and it makes him laugh harder when other people are laughing. And he's at that age in life where potty humor is his favorite kind of humor. So, at work, we have a phone that gets passed around because we have an on-call. I work at the University of Georgia, and we have an on-call system. And so we pass that phone around to make sure that we can be available to talk to students after hours if they need it. And so it's the same number and gets passed around. Well, I hold that phone sometimes, and so Connor thought that that was my phone. And so this week, he was texting me, so he thought, and telling me jokes and calling me names. And what he didn't know is that he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to one of my coworkers and calling them names like poo-poo head and things like that. Well, my coworker thought that I was texting her because the email address attached to the account had my name in it, which is actually his name. So then my coworker comes to me and says to me, "It's kind of funny, but why are you calling me a poo-poo head?" And so we had to go on this big investigation to figure out what in the world was going on, and it turned out Connor was texting, and it was a whole big thing. And it made a very big laugh for a lot of people this week. But we're not here to talk about that today. That's another topic, another day, probably better context in a different situation. I am humbled and excited to be with you here this morning. In my work at UGA, I end up talking to groups of people fairly often. I will tell you what, though, there's something about this that's a little different. And it's just like, whoa. So if I'm shaking, it's not because I'm trying to dance to clear my mind. It's because my knees are shaking. But I know that God will be with us, and he'll be with me this morning, and we'll have a good conversation. So as Pastor Michaela has mentioned in August, we're looking at the idea of fresh starts. And so she came to me and asked me if I talk a little bit about the idea of mental health. And what is that? In my role at UGA, I'm the director for the counseling and psychiatric services for the students. So I work in the health center, and we work to make health and mental health services available to as many students as we can. And there's a lot of students that could use some support because there's a lot of people in this world that could use support. And mental health is not necessarily always what we think it is, but that's a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. So it's an incredible privilege to be able to do that, to be able to watch people grow, learn, change. It's pretty fun stuff. It's also, like all work that we do, it has its hard days too. But before we do that, I would like for us to take a couple minutes to pray. So you join me in prayer? Father, it's your Sabbath, and I tell you what, this is just what a special day. It's absolutely my favorite day of the week, and I appreciate that in your wisdom, you established community, and you've brought us together, and we have a place to share, to be close to each other, and to be close to you, and to grow. I pray this morning that whatever words and discussion we have today, that this comes from you and not from me. Please bless my words and the ears of everyone here and who has a chance to hear this, and may they hear what you need them to hear this morning, Father. In your name I pray. Amen. All right, so this morning we're going to talk a little about this idea of what I want to capture as mind, body, and spirit. Now, we hear about these three words often. We hear about them in different ways, in different contexts of what that could look like. But today I want to try to capture that in this idea of health, but more specifically mental health. And we're going to talk about mental health on a spectrum, from one to the other, different ways that we can do that. There's lots of different qualifiers that we can put on a spectrum, right? It can be good and bad, healthy, not healthy. There's all different ways we could do that when we look at things. I don't necessarily want to put a lot of qualifiers on it, because I think that we can get ourselves into dangerous territories when we're trying to put things in a nice little box. I think every time I try to put something in a box, something comes along and reminds me of, well, that doesn't actually fit in that box. So I want us to try to stretch ourselves a little bit today with this idea of fresh starts. Let's see how we can try not to put some things in some boxes, and if it maybe works out a little differently for us. So when you think about mental health, what comes to mind? Do you think about a diagnosis maybe that you've heard? Do you think maybe about a person that you know in your life that has in some sort of way been attached to mental health? Or sometimes we say mental illness on the edge of the spectrum where there's more impact for the person. What comes to mind? What do you think mental health looks like in a person? Based on the internet, we definitely have lots of opinions about that. How about this person? If this works, I think this will work. Go for it. You can do it. Is that mental health? What do you see when you see that? A smile. Okay? That person has mental health if we think about it in the broad spectrum, right? Okay? And then what I mean by that is not from a perspective of mental health being a negative term, but it's a term that exists. Doesn't necessarily mean a person doesn't have health. It's health as it relates specifically to their mental capacities or emotional capacities or maybe even behavioral. But it also could be a person that does have something that could be negatively impacting their mental health. Now, we like to try to guess too often those kinds of people, right? And we can slip very easily into a judgmental space. But that's probably just me. So I'm going to own that. I'm sure no one else does that. We don't make guesses and judgments about people. We probably didn't see the fact that he had a gap in between his teeth and jump to conclusions about that, right? Or the fact that he's wearing two shirts for some reason. Or how about those glasses? I actually really like those glasses. I wish that I could pull those glasses off, but I definitely cannot do that. How about this? When we see something like this, or someone like this. What's the first thing you saw in this picture? Another smile? Okay. His eyes? Is that what I heard? What did you see in his eyes? He's in a regular place that you and I would go? Oh, now see, you're making some assumptions about me. Well, if you say a store, yes. I've been in a store. So that's fair.
You never walked in any of those buildings in there?
Sometimes, but I don't know if I would say regularly. I'm just playing with you.
Oh, that's fine.
But what might we think, why is he in front of a DSW? Maybe he likes shoes. Maybe it's just random that happened. Maybe he was drugged there by somebody else. He has his hat on backwards, so I like to think he has some cool vibes going. He's laid back, but that's, of course, all the things that happen in my brain when I see a hat on backwards, those automatic things that come in. He's not afraid to look at you. Yeah, he's this picture, he's just kind of looking right at you, right? And it's fascinating how photography can do that, yeah. And I'm going to guess he's somewhere where it's somewhat chilly because he is wearing a coat. How about this? Come on, you can do it. What's the first thing you see with this person? She's not smiling? No, she's not smiling. She's questioning? Is that what I heard you say? Okay. Questioning? Unsure? She looks very,
I like her makeup, but I like makeup, so that picture
okay.
is normal.
All right, you like her makeup.
Gone to the trouble to do something for herself to make herself look nice.
Okay. You said nose piercing. Okay. So, cool or not cool, depending on our perspective on that. It also looks like she maybe colored her hair. I had that color once. I think mine was a little darker, though, but similar. And she's also got a hat. Is that fair? She's got some cool vibes to her. She looks very thoughtful. Now, she's not smiling, so does that mean that she's got a mental health situation? Yes? Yes, absolutely. And that's part of the idea, right? We don't necessarily know. We can't guess. We do ourselves a disadvantage, and we hurt other people and ourselves in the relationships we have them when we try to jump to too many conclusions. Yeah. She might just be a person that is seeing something behind the camera that we don't know, and it's concerning her. Who knows? It could be anything, right? And definitely, the idea of being happy and smiling all the time is kind of this false reality that we've created for ourselves, isn't it? Now, sometimes it's a little easier, but it's still not necessarily right. I didn't know that you dressed up in costumes, Justin. Especially hanging out at, I don't know, looks like a gas station maybe? I don't know. But now, we see something like this happening, and we kind of, at times, could jump to conclusions, but again, not necessarily going to be correct. Yes? He's pointing that way? Yeah, I think he's pointing everybody to the birthday party. They're having a costume party maybe. And then how about this? A young man, he's happy, or he's got a smile on his face at least. He likes bright colors, or he works a job that makes him wear bright colors. All of these are good human beings. They have a place in our world, and they have relationships with lots of people around them. And they also have certain dynamics and characteristics and presentations that our brain sees and we think different things about it. It's influenced by what we've been taught. It's influenced by experiences that we've had and groups of people or groups of individuals that we've spent time around. And more and more and more, it's influenced by messages that we hear in various forms of media as we're exposed to more and more of that. But it's easy to jump to conclusions. But we don't want to do that. Because some things do fit into boxes. Most of the time, the color blue is the color blue. But there's a lot of things that don't. And mental health is one of those things that doesn't often fit into the boxes that we've created for it. So I want to talk a little bit about let's try to capture some of those things that talk about mental health. And hopefully this will help give us some ideas of that idea of some fresh starts as we look at what we can do after that. So some quick facts, because I just can't help myself. I like numbers a little too much. 1 in 5 adults in a given year have an experience that qualifies as mental health. And that's in the US. So that's roughly 52 million people. That is a lot of people. 1 in 6 youth aged 6 to 17 also. 50% of all lifetime mental health concerns first start to exhibit themselves by the age of 14. And 75% of that happens by the age of 24. This is work that I do every day, but that still shocks me, even though I've seen that before. And with the age range 10 to 34, suicide is the number 2 reason cause for death. In a given year in the US, we have roughly 20 million people that experience depression. We have another 48 million people that experience anxiety. And we have about another 9 million people that experience PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, these are the diagnostic, okay? This is, when we talk about the spectrum, we talk about ideas of impact. This is on the far end of diagnostic mental health in the sense that it fits into a box to some degree. But mental health is not just mental illness in the way that we sometimes capture it, right? It's the entire experience. Joy, happiness, this is also part of mental health. Grief is part of mental health. And there are dynamics of mental health that we will often use words kind of in conversations with people, but they don't necessarily have the same level of impact. And it's funny that we do that with mental health because we don't do that with other health areas. You know, for example, we don't talk about cancer in the same way that we talk about depression. Oh, I'm just feeling really depressed today, or that was a really depressing situation. We don't use cancer in that same way because it doesn't make sense in the way that we capture health things. There's a lot of people impacted by this stuff. I think during COVID, we've all experienced mental health on the wide range of the spectrum, right? We've had joy when we didn't have to wear masks anymore, and we had grief when it came back. And then we also had grief when we knew people that were sick. And for some of us, have had people that we knew that passed away. It's been this broad range of what's going on. And for many of us, we've also experienced anxiety. especially when COVID first was happening and we didn't know how it was going to impact the world. And it's gone in waves too, right? Just as COVID has gone in waves to some degree. But we've talked about COVID enough, so let's make a pact not to talk about it anymore today, because I'm a little tired of it. Now, 45% of people in the U.S. get treatment for mental health needs every year. That's awesome. That also means that the majority don't. Now, when we break it down by certain groups, 37% of men receive help. Now, that's not bad. That's like a little more than a third. But it's also one of the lowest. And, you know, when we think mental health, we often assume emotion, right? And if we go along with the stereotypes of men, and I think it might be accurate in this case, we're not necessarily always good at sitting down and talking about our emotions, unless it's anger. Now that we're pretty good with, but we don't necessarily cover the entire spectrum of emotion that well. But it impacts access. Access to services also impacts people differently. So when we look at African American individuals, about 33% have access every year or receive treatment. 34% of Hispanic or Latino. 23% of individuals that identify as Asian. 50% of women. Go women. I like that. That's cool. And 55% of people in the U.S., 55% of counties in the U.S. don't have access to a psychiatrist. And if you don't know what a psychiatrist is, that's a medical doctor that specializes in mental health and mental health medications. Now, why does this matter? So maybe you don't fit in any one of those stats that we've discussed at this point. That's possible. I tried to cover the gamut, but it's possible. You might not. Why does it matter to us? Well, someone with depression is 40% higher risk of having cardiovascular or metabolic disease. The unemployment rate for someone with mental health concerns is twice as high as someone who does not. Depression is the leading cause of disability across the entire world. And depression and anxiety cost our global economy on average about $1 trillion a year. So if you don't care about people, that's cool. I'm not going to judge you for that. Maybe you care about money. So it's something that impacts lots of different things. But you know what? There's a lot that we can do about it. And I think for us as a group of believers, as a group of faith, and especially as a group of people that are connected in some sort of way with the Adventist Church, there are things that we can look at. And so I don't want to just look at stats, and because hopefully that's not caused you to feel down too much. It's just the world that we're living in right now. It helps us to have information that gives us more information to make good decisions. Now, there are also a couple of things around mental health when we talk about boxes that aren't always correct, but they seem to carry through often in our society. So we talked about facts. It's probably good to talk about a couple of myths. I hope we've already kind of debunked the myth that mental health doesn't impact anyone, or it doesn't necessarily impact me. We've talked about that, right? That's one myth that's often out there. We've also kind of, I think, challenged the myth that children don't have experiences with mental health needs. In fact, most things happen before someone leaves childhood. Now, one thing I see a lot, especially in certain media outlets, talks about mental health as how it relates to violence and bad behavior. Research article after research article after study shows that only about 3 to 5% of crime that happens, especially violent crime, has any connection to mental health. If you look at but that's not the way it's often portrayed, right? That's often not how that's portrayed. If we want to make a guess at, rather than mental health, if we want to use something that's going to give us a better variable of guessing, it's two variables give us a much higher percentage. And when you look at all the stats, I was just looking at it this week, when you look at the stats that come from the FBI, at least from the database that they look at, there's two things that predict about 60% of crime. White man. Now, we have different perspectives on that, right? But I think that it's important for me to say that because that's me. All right? And that might make us uncomfortable, but it is also part of the space that we live in. So let's the point is, let's not jump to conclusions about anything. Because maybe I'm part of that 60%, but maybe I'm not. Wouldn't you like to know? Not now. I'm not now. Well, as long as I'm not driving. Because then I don't always go the speed limit. But that's not exactly what we're talking about anyways. But how about some other things? When we look at what a person has mental health concerns, we often make assumptions about what they can't do. They can't hold a job. They can't be in a good relationship. How about what we assume as it relates to church? What are certain myths that we have as Christians and mental health? Anyone have one you'd be willing to share? No judgment, of course. It's not what you think. It's just something you've heard.
I think a lot of people think that if you're right, if you're really holy, you're not going to be depressed. And every normal person encounters something that's going to make them disappointed or depressed briefly. They can go to Jesus and ask for help, but they also need to have a plan what they're going to do to help do that too. And I just think some people think if you're holy enough, you won't do that. And, obviously I'm not holy enough. I have my bad moments. And I don't think, I just think that's a misnomer for people that you're really holy, you won't get depressed.
Okay. So I appreciate that. And I'm gonna try to summarize that into one sentence. So please tell me if this is not what you were suggesting. If you have enough Jesus, and you're close enough to Jesus, and you're a good enough Christian, then you're not going to have any problems with mental health.
I agree with that.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I think that we often hear, right? If you're a good enough Christian, then you're not going to have, mental health is not going to be your thing. We don't necessarily say it like that, but maybe we say it in the other way. That if you have a mental health thing, maybe it's because you don't have enough Jesus in your life. And you just need a little more Jesus. Now, I think we could always use more Jesus. I'm a big supporter of that. I don't necessarily know if it's that simple. We don't say that to people when they break their arm. I'm sorry you broke your arm. You just need a little more Jesus. That probably wouldn't have happened. Or they get in a car accident, and I think if you probably would have been praying harder, you probably wouldn't have had that accident. So we do that in the areas, but in other areas, I think where we have discomfort, we attach to things that, help us feel better, which makes sense, but that's not necessarily, dare I say. Now, again, Jesus is always good, and he's always here to help us. But there's also other things that we can do. And there's other things that we can do to help each other. At the far extreme of bias around mental health is just the idea that it doesn't even exist to begin with. And I can tell you from the work that I do, talking to college students, there's more people that live that way, even if they don't say it out loud, we can contribute to a culture and a community that doesn't make it possible to talk about it. In that way, that also makes it hard for it to exist if we don't give it a space. And there's a lot of students that have lived their life in the shadows because there's things that can't be talked about. And it's not just mental health, but that's definitely one of them. Or how about this idea? If you have a mental health thing, you're not stable, and therefore you can't be involved in church. You can show up and get that Jesus that you don't have enough of so that you can get better, but we can't have you working and contributing into the church, because who knows? We just can't predict what you might do next time, especially when you have children. Yeah, I mean, I'm in trouble. I'm white, I'm male, I've got children. Whew, good thing I've got Beth. I'd be in trouble. All right, so what do we want to do? As human beings, as a community of Christian believers, as Adventists, what can we do about this? Well, we can look at the information, right? We can take that in, we can try to learn from it, and we can turn it into action. We can take all the things that make us great, all the gifts that God has given us, and we can do something with that. So let's talk about this idea of mind, body, and spirit a little bit closer. When you think about mind, what comes to mind? Thoughts? All right. Thoughts are a part of our mind. Yeah, that's good. It's a mental thing. Yeah? The mind is also a biological thing, if we want to look at it in that way. And as I've learned more through the years, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most is just learning about the structure of the brain itself. Because there are some fascinating things about it. It's really complex. We know almost nothing about it. And just from a perspective of labels, there are some really fun areas of the brain. You've got things that make sense, like the frontal lobe, the area at the front of your brain, okay? But then you've got other things like the medulla oblongata. Definitely, that's not going to tell you anything about its location, but it definitely does give your tongue a good exercise. All sorts of things going on in our brain, and they all contribute to different things. Now, the Bible talks about the mind a lot, and it talks about it in various ways. But it recognizes the importance of the mind in our lives, in our work, and is in our experience as a Christian. One of my favorite verses that talks about this is in Philippians. And you've, I'm sure, heard this before, because, speaking for myself, this is a verse I heard a lot growing up. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. That's a good little verse. Gives us some ideas of where we want to try to focus our energy a little bit. Now, my mom's here today, and I'm trying to remember if this is correct. So, I think maybe our two memories combined is somewhat accurate. But I don't know. I'm losing mine quickly, and, I think you've got probably at least as much as I do. But anyways, I feel like this was on a, was this on a plaque by the computer?
First it was by the TV, and later it was by the computer.
By the TV and then by the computer. Special things that only a mom can do, right? Here's a little reminder of the way that we want to live, but helpful. When I was young and I saw that, I would just roll my eyes. Now I've gained a little more appreciation for it because now I'm thinking the same thing for my kids. All right, so we know the importance of the mind. We're not going to go into great detail with it today, but we know that it's an important part of what we do, and it's a critical part of mental health. It can contribute, positively to our mental health, and when things aren't necessarily working the way that we would like them to, then it's not necessarily going to contribute. Now, there's also a biological process to that, right? And there are things when our cholesterol maybe isn't going the way that we want it to. There's things that we can change about our behavior. As much as I've regretted having to do it, I need to eat less cheese. It's unfortunate because it's basically the thing that I would eat all the time if I could, but it's also not good for my cholesterol. Certain things with our mind are the same way. Our mind is incredible. It holds on to information that we don't even recognize sometimes until we have an experience and all of that comes flooding back. It's pretty amazing. And so that speaks to the idea of maybe what we want to put in to our mind. Because it may come out at some point. Now, our body is a big part of that too. Our body is something that I think as Adventists, we have a particular kind of good part of the pie, shall I say. No pun intended. But nutrition and taking care of ourselves is a big part of what we talk about as Adventists. For some of us, that turns out in the idea of not eating meat. For some of us, that's not the case, and that's cool. For some of us, we talk about ideas of caffeine. For some of us, it's exercise. How much exercise do we get? It's sleep is a big part of that. There's lots of different things. We have a really strong, what we typically call the health message, right? That is ultimately a huge part of mental health. Because as much as we try to ignore this and then separate this, the mind and the body are attached. So what we do with our body impacts what we do with our mind, which all is part of our mental health. And if any one of those things are not necessarily operating at their peak, they don't always benefit us as much as possible. All right, here who has heard of Abraham Maslow? Yes? Cool. Oh, there's a lot of people raising their hands, more than I anticipated. Well done. Well, you are well studied. Well, at some point, he's included in a lot of classes at college, especially some of those introductory psychology classes. So as a psychologist, you can imagine I heard his name a lot. And when I first heard it, I thought it was rather simplistic. As I've lived on in life and done a lot of work in the field of psychology, I've learned that there is sometimes beauty in simplicity. And so he has an idea called the hierarchy of needs. So that comes in really well in our discussion today. So I wanted to look at it real fast. So the idea is that you go from the bottom to the top as far as importance of needs, and you can't get to one without getting to the other. All right, so at the bottom here, you've got basic things like breathing, food, water, safety, which is the second one. So that's a house, a place that you can have both physical safety and psychological, emotional safety. You can't get here without having this first, right? If you're not alive, if you're not breathing, you're not going to go anywhere else on this. I think, is that fair to say? Yep. If we've got safety, then it makes it possible for love, for belonging, for community. And then beyond that, we've got ideas that start to pertain to our own self-confidence. Because I don't know if you've ever been in any of these situations. I'm going to guess you've been at least in the top 3, or I would hope. I'd hope you've had all 5. But as we get to the higher up we go, the narrower it gets. And the idea behind his theory is that the harder it is, the more complex it is. And I would say that it is hard to feel really good about ourselves and to have respect for a lot of people, or vice versa, when we're struggling with having a sense of community, having a sense of safety. This also, I think, describes the ideas of mental health really important too. And it talks about how we can often contribute to someone's mental health without having to be a therapist. Okay? Because the world knows we don't need all of us to be therapists. We'd have to sit around and talk about our feelings all day, and that, I think, would probably get on all of our nerves. All right, maybe that's just a joke for me. No worries. We all can contribute differently. We all have something to give. And so one of those, I think a perfect example of what we did as a church just a couple of weeks ago was we gave out backpacks. Now, what does that have to do with someone's mental health? I think that has a lot to do with someone's mental health, because they're in a situation where they have a need. They are super, I don't want to assume, they're probably concerned, anxious a little bit about going back to school, and they don't have resources to have something that seems as small as a backpack. But that can have a lot of meaning. It's a way to demonstrate and show someone that they're loved, that they're cared for, that someone sees them. And it's a way for them to fit in to the environment that they're going into. So something small like that can have a lot to do with someone's mental health. Seeing someone, looking them in the eyes, that alone can do a lot for someone's mental health. There's lots of different things that we can do, and it all relates to these various levels. It doesn't have to be sitting down with someone and talking to them about why they've had a bad day, but that can be part of it too. It speaks to the importance of it's all a system. It's not these little pockets and boxes we try to put it into to make it easy, but it's the combination of those things that gives it the most power and the most opportunity. And that's where we can all contribute and be part of the solution. Now, what about the Spirit? The idea of Spirit is something that goes a lot of different directions, right? It has its certain meanings, and it means different things with certain groups. Even has different meanings within the Christian faith and with the Adventist faith, depending on what we're saying. And we're not talking about, this is not a talk about the spirit of the dead and what happens when you die. That's another conversation about spirit. This is about spirit as in how we exist, how we present ourselves in the world, how we operate in the world. I think that Proverbs has a verse that speaks to this really well. Proverbs 17:22 says that a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Now, when I hear that, that hits me at a couple different levels. But I think most what hits me is hearing the word crushed. Because that's not something that most likely, in the way that I read that at least, that person did to themselves. That's something that happened to them. And that calls me out as a person, as a human being, and challenges me to think about, am I doing something that's crushing somebody's spirit? Or am I contributing to an environment that is crushing somebody's spirit? Or am I contributing to a space or a system that could be crushing somebody's spirit? And I will tell you, as someone that sits on the other side, of those experiences with people when they're trying to make sense of it, it's something that can last with someone for a long time. But that's not the only option. We can be part of helping contribute to the cheerful heart in the way that we navigate the world, in the way that we walk, in the way that we treat people, in the ways that we tweet or we Snapchat or these other social medias that I'm completely ignorant about. But the way that we talk on Facebook, the things that we say to ourselves when we're driving down the road, or maybe we're saying to the other person in the car through our window, at I'm sure perfectly reasonable volumes. All these are different things that contribute to and are part of the way we walk the world and how we can love each other ultimately. We can choose to love each other in all the various ways that we do that. And as Christians, as Adventists, we have a special space in how we can do that because God has given us access to understanding and therefore opportunity to better picture and meet the whole person. We can help minister to physical needs, to community needs, to individual needs, and to spiritual needs. God exists in this idea of community. And that's how he's designed this world, in community and in relationship. No thing exists independent of itself. I don't know if you've ever sat down and thought about that, but I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that in the last, I think, dare I say the word COVID again, in this last couple of years that we've had, because in so many ways our community has been torn apart and pulled away from each other. We've been just really wanting to be back together with each other in various ways. I think it's really highlighted how it was important to us and in ways we didn't maybe understand how important. We have a special way to contribute to each other individually and to each other as a group with our community of faith, and ultimately our community of health. So it's these combinations of things, I think, that ultimately presents us with the greatest opportunity that we have. We can all go out and contribute in different ways in the world. And there's lots of people that don't identify as Christian, and they also do lots of good things in the world. And they show love and compassion to people as well. We can't claim that we have that special spot in the world, because that's probably a little oversold. But we have access and connection that gives us an extra dose, I hope, of grace. It gives us an extra dose of mercy, and it gives us an extra dose of love and forgiveness that we can lend to others, maybe when we're not necessarily experiencing it ourselves. And that's not always easy, is it? It's not. But I think that's where, in fun and challenging ways, God calls us to be different. Now, when I was younger, I liked to be different for different reasons. You know, red hair color, that was one way I liked to do that. I liked to have stickers on the back of my vehicles. I liked to listen to really loud music. I still like to do some of those things, so I didn't leave all that behind. And sometimes maybe people made assumptions about me, and that's okay. Hopefully there were some good assumptions. And, you know, probably in another 30 years, it's not going to matter, because I'm going to be so deaf from listening to that loud music that I'm not going to hear their opinions about me anyways. But what I want for us is whatever it is out there, whatever messages we've heard, whatever things that we've been told about ourselves or about each other, I want us to challenge that. I want us to look at what is the example that Christ set for us. What do we see in his word that he teaches us about himself, about his character, and about us? and with all the things that we have coming in to our brain and into our mind, let's challenge that. Let's just not accept it, but let's think about it, and let's, in some cases, maybe not even let it enter. So maybe that means just turn the TV off a little bit. Or maybe it means that we consume a little less social media. Or maybe it means that we try to think a little bit more about what we're saying. Because I tell you what, God built us in relationship and in community. I was saying earlier that there's nothing that exists by itself. And if we look at creation, that gives us, at least 3, maybe 4 examples of where he established that at the core of what he did. Night and day, they exist together. He created animals, but he created them in relationship, in pairs with each other. He created Adam and then realized that's not a good idea because that man's definitely not going to survive on his own. So he needs a partner. Let's get him a partner. And he created relationship there, but then he created relationship between human and nature and gave us a responsibility of taking care of the rest of his creation. And he created us to be in a relationship with him. And that is our greatest strength. And that is why the devil is attacking it so hard. Because he knows if he can break down our relationships, if he can break down our communities, if he can break down the things that makes us strong and brings us closer to God, then he's winning. And I don't know about you, but it seems like he's trying really, really hard these days. I don't want to see that happen. So let's try to do this. The devil is doing his best with distracting us. And with that distraction, it creates destruction. He's creating destruction with pain, with judgment, with selfishness, and especially right now, with fear. But we have a solution. We have a source, and we have a community that doesn't have to accept that. We've got a relationship with our Father, with God, and with each other. So we can trade distraction for attention. We can trade pain for healing. Judgment for compassion. And love for fear. I see it happen every day. And I know that we are in a special people and a special time, and we have a great opportunity. And let us not be hard on ourselves if we don't get it right every single time, because it's about process and about change. So I guess I'll want to share this one last thing that comes from Matthew. So I really like this passage, and so I just want to read it. And this is from the Message translation, so I don't know if you've ever used that. There are certain times where I think it just kind of hits things really well. It really spoke to me when I read it, and so I want to share it with you all. Let me tell you why you are here. You are here to be salt seasoning that brings out the God flavors of this earth. If you lose your saltiness, how will people taste godliness? You've lost your usefulness, and you will end up in the garbage. Here's another way to put it. You are here to be light, bringing out the God colors in the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on a hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a blanket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now that I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand, shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. Be opening up to others. You'll prompt people to open up with God. I don't know about you, but that is pretty encouraging. It's also a little intimidating, if I'm honest, but I know that it's not just me. That's not something I have to do by myself. God's here helping me with it. Christ is here helping me learn a little bit every day. And I've got an incredible family, an incredible community, and we can do it together. So when one of us is maybe not feeling it as good one day, one of us can help each other along the way. And it's in that power where, whether it's broken legs or broken hearts or broken minds, we can support each other and keep moving on, growing closer with each other and closer with God.
You're welcome to stand with me for our closing hymn. It'll be 304, Faith of Our Fathers. The words are also on the back of your bulletin.
Have a quick prayer, and then we'll go enjoy the rest of our Sabbath. Father, we thank you for bringing us all together this morning. We thank you for sharing with us and opening our hearts and minds this morning. We pray for everybody here, all the families represented, but we also know there's a lot who are not here. And there's a lot of things going on in the world these days. I just pray, Father, that for as much of your love and your compassion as we can handle it, that you'll share it with us, especially in the darker corners of the place in the world today. Thank you, Father, so much